Inside a crowded convenience store on a cold, rainy night in suburban Seattle, a single father quietly placed a carton of milk back on the shelf after his debit card was declined 3 times in front of everyone. His 6-year-old daughter held a worn teddy bear that once belonged to her mother and asked in the smallest voice whether she would still get milk before bed. As the man lowered his head to leave in silence, a famous billionaire walked through the door and froze. What stopped her was not his poverty. The morning Ethan Cole almost forgot what day it was, the radiator in the apartment kicked twice and gave up. He hit it with the side of his fist out of habit, and the metal answered with a tired groan that sounded a little too much like himself. It was 5:45. The kitchen still smelled faintly of last night's rice and the cheap cinnamon candle Lily had insisted on lighting before bed. He stood at the counter in a thin gray t-shirt holding a mug of coffee he had reheated 3 times since the day before and watched the rain crawl down the window in long, indecisive lines. On the side of the refrigerator, held by a magnet shaped like a tiny green apple, was a square of yellow paper. The handwriting was small and careful, the kind of handwriting a woman uses when she is writing something she wants the other person to keep. Don't lose yourself while you're trying to survive. Sarah had written it on the morning of her last good week almost 2 years ago now, and stuck it there as a joke about him forgetting to eat. He had never moved it. Some mornings he didn't read it at all. Some mornings, like this one, he read it twice. The wedding photo on the small shelf above the stove had a thin line of dust along the top of the frame. He wiped it with his thumb on the way past, the way another man might touch a saint's medallion, and then he opened the bedroom door an inch. Lily was still asleep, curled around the teddy bear that used to sit on the dresser beside Sarah's hairbrush. The bear's left ear had been chewed flat by a dog she did not remember owning, and one of its glass eyes was a slightly different brown than the other because Sarah had replaced it once with whatever button she could find. Around Lily's small shoulders was a scarf. It was wool soft from years of washing and far too long for a child of 6. It had been her mother's. She wore it most nights now, even in bed. He let her sleep 10 more minutes than he should have. By the time he carried her into the kitchen, wrapped in the scarf and a blanket, the rain had thickened into something steady and gray. He warmed a half cup of milk on the stove because the microwave had been making a noise he did not have the money to investigate, and slid a piece of toast onto a plate shaped like a smiling sun. "Daddy," Lily said, watching the steam rise off the milk. "Is Mommy cold up there?" He stirred the milk one more time before he answered, so his voice would not catch on anything sharp. "She's warm, sweetheart. She's been keeping herself warm every day. That's just what she does." Lily nodded as if this were a perfectly reasonable scientific explanation and dipped the toast into the milk. Across town, in a glass house on a hill that had a view of the lake on clear days, Victoria Hale was already on her second meeting of the morning. She was 55 years old, the founder and chief executive of Hale Markets, a regional grocery and home goods chain that had 37 stores and a logo people in 3 states recognized without thinking about it. She had on a charcoal suit that had been tailored in New York's small diamond studs in her ears, and a man's wristwatch with a scratched leather band that did not match anything else she was wearing. The watch was older than her assistant. She never took it off. Her daughter Amelia sat on the far end of the long marble island eating cereal 1 piece at a time. 12 years old, dark braid down her back, a book about ocean currents open beside her bowl. She had not looked at her mother in 11 minutes. Victoria had counted the way she counted most things without meaning to. "There's a fundraiser tonight," Victoria said into her phone, holding up one finger toward Amelia without turning her head. "Move the 7 o'clock to tomorrow. Tell him I'll call from the car." Amelia closed the book. "You said we'd have dinner." "We are having dinner, after the fundraiser." "That's not dinner, Mom. That's leftovers in the kitchen at 11. Victoria finally looked up. Her daughter's eyes had Sarah's same dark, steady patience, except Victoria did not know the comparison existed because she did not know Sarah and would not know her name for another 6 months. "I'll be done by 9, she said. Amelia picked up her book again. "Sure. By the time the rain turned cold enough to feel like small stones, Ethan was crawling out from under a rooftop air handler in Bellevue with grease on his cheek and a check for $240 folded into his back pocket. He had 3 more service calls in the app before noon. He took the second one because it was on the way home. He skipped lunch because he had skipped lunch the day before, and his body was used to it now. By 6 in the evening, he had made just under $400 for 14 hours of work before gas, before tools, before the part of his back that was going to ache tomorrow. He picked Lily up from the after-school program at St. Anne's, where the woman at the front desk pretended not to notice that his payment for the month was 11 days late, and they drove home through the kind of rain that makes headlights look like halos. Lily had drawn a picture in art class. It was him holding her hand, both of them standing under an umbrella that was bigger than the house behind them. She had labeled the umbrella in careful kindergarten letters, Dad. He told her it was the best picture anyone had ever made. He meant it. Inside the apartment, while she watched her one allowed half hour of television, he checked her temperature with the back of his hand, the way Sarah used to do. It was warm, not hot, warmer than yesterday. He looked at the bottle of children's fever reducer on the counter. There was perhaps a teaspoon left in it. He looked at the carton of milk in the refrigerator. There was perhaps a swallow left in that. He did the math the way men in his situation always do the math, quickly and without telling anyone. The convenience store on the corner of 8th and Ridgeway stayed open until midnight and was the cheapest place within walking distance that sold both medicine and milk. He held Lily's hand on the way in. She had insisted on bringing the teddy bear. The bear was now also wearing the scarf because Lily had decided the bear was cold. The bell above the door rang once. The boy at the register, who could not have been more than 19, glanced up from his phone and looked back down. 2 college students were arguing softly over a freezer case of pizzas. A woman in scrubs was paying for a coffee and a granola bar with the slow patience of someone at the end of a 12-hour shift. Outside, headlights slid across the wet glass. Ethan put a small carton of whole milk, a loaf of store-brand bread, and a box of children's acetaminophen on the counter. The total came to $19.42. He swiped his card. "Try again, sir," the cashier said, not unkindly. He swiped it a second time. The little screen made the same small sound. He swiped it a third time because some part of him still believed that the third try was the kind of thing the universe rewarded. The cashier turned the screen around so he could see for himself. Insufficient funds. He had known. He had known on the drive over, and he had known when he picked the basket up, and he had known when he looked at the milk. But knowing a thing and standing in front of a stranger watching the thing happen are 2 different kinds of knowing. He took out his wallet, the leather worn pale at the corners, and counted what was inside. $6 in bills, 2 quarters a dime, 3 pennies. He counted it again because counting it again was something to do with his hands. "Can I?" he said quietly, and his voice was completely steady because he had practiced this voice for 2 years. "Can I take the milk off?" The cashier nodded. Behind him, the line of 3 people did the small American shuffle of pretending not to see. Lily looked up. "Daddy," she said, "I don't need milk tonight. It's okay." She said it the way a 6-year-old says a sentence she has heard adults say to each other without fully understanding the weight of it, only knowing that it is the kind of sentence that helps. He could not look at her for a moment. He looked at the carton instead. He picked it up from the counter and walked it back to the dairy case himself because he did not want the cashier to have to do it, and he set it gently on the shelf where it had been labeled out the way it had been when he found it. The bell above the door rang again as he walked back. A woman in a long charcoal coat stepped in out of the rain, shaking water off a black umbrella with a girl of about 12 close behind her. The woman's eyes moved across the store the way the eyes of people who are used to being recognized move across rooms expecting nothing in particular. They landed on Ethan as he returned to the counter, paid for the bread and the medicine with crumpled bills and coins, and lifted his daughter onto his hip because she was tired and her shoes were wet. What stopped Victoria was not the scene. She had seen versions of this scene before from a distance the way wealthy people see weather. What stopped Victoria was the watch on the man's wrist as he reached for the plastic bag. It was a steel watch with a cracked leather band dial yellowed by years, the kind of watch a working man wears for 30 years and then gives to his son. It was, except for the scratch pattern, the same watch she was wearing under the cuff of her own coat. Amelia, who was 12 and had not yet learned the adult skill of not seeing things, took one full step toward Ethan. Victoria caught her wrist without looking down.
"Don't," she said very quietly. "Not like that."
Outside in the parking lot, Ethan set Lily down to fix her hood, and as he straightened up, he saw the wallet on the wet asphalt next to the rear tire of a black sedan. It was thick. It was leather. It had clearly fallen out of someone's coat pocket. He picked it up. He opened it the way a person opens something he is afraid of, and he saw the cash, and he saw the cards, and he saw for one full second the way $200 could look like enough milk for a month. He closed the wallet. He held it in both hands. He looked at his daughter and at the apartment 2 blocks away where the radiator did not work, and at the rain. Then he turned around and walked back into the store. "Excuse me," he said to the man in the wool coat near the chip aisle holding the wallet up. "I think you dropped this, sir. You should check it before I hand it over." Victoria, 3 aisles away, watched him do this. She did not move. There is something a lot of people never quite understand. The dignity of poor people is often more expensive than the things they cannot afford. They do not put the milk back because they do not need it. They put it back because they want their child to grow up with a father who does not owe anyone anything. And the way Ethan returned that wallet was not nobility exactly. It was instinct. The instinct of a man who had been asking himself every day for 2 years what kind of father he could call himself tomorrow if he took a thing tonight that did not belong to him. People who are poor in money but rich in principle are not really poor. They are simply paying for a thing the wealthy have sometimes forgotten how to buy. In the car, Amelia could not stop looking at her mother's hands on the steering wheel. "Why didn't you let me give him something?" Victoria did not answer for almost a full block. "Because a man like that," she said, "finally doesn't take. You'd have hurt him." "How do you know?" She did not answer that one at all. She drove the rest of the way home with the heater on too high and her left hand resting unconsciously on the face of her father's old watch. That night, in a study lined with books she had not read in years, Victoria called her assistant and asked her to find out very quietly the name of a man who had bought bread and children's medicine at a convenience store on 8th and Ridgeway at approximately 9:40 in the evening. She told herself she did not yet know why. Sometimes the wounds we have buried do not really heal. They sleep. They sleep until a story comes along that resembles them closely enough to wake them up. And when they wake, we have 2 choices. We can bury them again, or we can use them to find the person who is standing exactly where we used to stand. Victoria did not yet know which one she was going to choose, but she had, for the first time in a very long time, stopped moving. 3 days after the night at the convenience store, Ethan got an email he had been refusing to hope for. A mid-sized facilities company in Tukwila wanted him to come in Friday morning for what they called a final conversation. The position was a full-time HVAC technician with benefits. There was a paragraph in the email about dental and another about a retirement match, and he read both paragraphs twice before he read the time of the meeting. He printed the email at the public library because he did not own a printer anymore, folded it and put it inside the kitchen drawer beside the spoon Lily liked best. He washed his last clean button-down shirt in the sink that night, hung it over the shower rod, and ironed it in the morning with a pan because the iron had gone the way of the microwave. Lily watched him knot his tie in the small mirror by the door and told him he looked like the dad on the cereal box. He told her that was the highest compliment a man could receive before 9 in the morning. She kissed his hand the way Sarah used to kiss it on the inside of the wrist, and he felt for one full second like a person who could still carry good news home. The interview lasted 40 minutes. The man across the desk had kind eyes and a coffee mug that said, "World's okayest golfer," and he said the words "We'd love to bring you on board" out loud in that exact order before he ever opened the laptop. Ethan held himself very still. He had learned not to let his face move during good news because good news in his life had developed the habit of being followed quickly by something else. The man's face changed when the background check came back. He turned the laptop a few inches, the way the cashier had turned the card reader, and he asked Ethan in a careful voice if there was something he wanted to explain about the flag on his record from his previous employer. The flag said suspected misappropriation of company equipment. The flag had been there for 19 months. Ethan had not put it there. He had no way to take it off. He told the truth, the short version, in 5 sentences. The man with the kind eyes nodded and said he believed him, and said also that the company's insurance carrier did not allow them to hire technicians with that flag on file regardless of disposition, regardless of belief. The polite rejection email arrived before Ethan got home. He took off the tie in the parking lot of a gas station, folded it the way Sarah had taught him to fold ties, and put it on the passenger seat. He sat there for a few minutes with his hands on the steering wheel. Then he drove to pick up his daughter. The eviction notice was taped to his apartment door on Monday afternoon. It was a 3-day pay or vacate notice printed on cheap paper with the date filled in by hand in the top corner. He had known it was coming. He had been short on rent for 2 months. The landlord, a man named Mr. Whitaker, who was not unkind, but who had children of his own, and a mortgage on the building, had warned him at the start of the month with a phone call that went, "You know I can't keep doing this, son." The notice was simply the law catching up to the warning. Ethan read it twice in the hallway before he opened the door. He put it in the same drawer as the printed email. That night, Lily's temperature climbed past 101. He gave her the last of the children's acetaminophen and held a cool washcloth against the back of her neck, the way Sarah used to do, and at 2:15 in the morning her cheeks went a kind of red. He had only seen one time in his life. He stood in the kitchen with his phone in his hand for almost a minute before he did the thing he had been refusing to do for 2 years. He knocked on Margaret's door. Margaret was the woman in 4B. She was somewhere in her late 60s, a retired second-grade teacher with a small white dog she had named Senator, and a habit of leaving zucchini bread in foil on the railing for whichever neighbor she had decided that week needed it. She opened the door in a robe, took one look at Ethan's face, and said, "Bring her here, honey, while you go." He drove Lily to the urgent care clinic 2 miles away. They saw her quickly. The fever broke around 4 in the morning. The nurse, a tired woman with a kind face, told him to keep her warm and keep her hydrated and to come back if it climbed again. He thanked her 3 times. He paid the copay with a credit card he was not certain would clear, and it did barely, and he drove home with his daughter asleep against his shoulder. When he carried Lily back upstairs, Margaret was waiting on the landing in her robe. She had made a pot of soup. She did not ask him if he wanted any. She simply pressed the warm container into his free hand and closed her door before he could say anything that sounded like no. As she turned the lock, she added over her shoulder that she had also slipped an envelope under his door, and that the envelope was 3 weeks of rent for Mr. Whitaker, and that he could pay her back $20 at a time for the rest of his life if it made him feel better, but that he was not under any circumstances allowed to give it back tonight. He stood in his own kitchen holding the soup and felt something inside his chest go quietly. Not break. Crack. The first thin crack a frozen river makes the day before it lets go. Across the lake, in a bedroom that looked out over water, Amelia could not see at that hour because of the rain. Amelia Hale was awake and counting the money in the small, zippered pouch she kept inside her sock drawer. $340. 2 birthdays worth. The number had been the same for almost a year. She had been saving for a telescope. She zipped the pouch, put it in the inner pocket of her school backpack, and went downstairs in her socks. Her mother was on a call in the home office. The door was closed. Through the glass panel beside the door, Amelia could see the back of Victoria's head and the corner of her laptop, and a yellow legal pad that had a name written across the top in black marker. The name was Ethan Cole. Beneath the name in smaller letters was an address Amelia had never seen on a street whose name she did not recognize. She wrote the address on the inside of her wrist with a ballpoint pen, very quickly, the way a girl 12 years old writes a thing she knows she is not supposed to write. The next afternoon after school, instead of getting into the car with the driver who had been waiting for her every day since she was 9, she walked 4 blocks east to the bus stop on Pine. She rode 2 buses. She sat near the window and watched the city she had grown up in change shape outside the glass. By the time she stood in front of Ethan's building, the rain had started again, and the dye in her cheap drugstore mascara was running a little, and she did not know it, and she would not have cared. Her plan had been simple. She would slip the envelope under the door. She would walk away. She would catch the bus back before her mother's 6 o'clock check-in. Lily opened the door before Amelia's hand reached the mail slot. The two girls looked at each other for a moment that felt longer than it was. Lily's nose was a little pink from her fever the night before. She was wearing the wool scarf indoors because Lily wore the scarf almost everywhere now. Amelia, who had practiced what she would say if anyone caught her, found that she could not remember any of it. "Are you my dad's friend?" Lily asked. Amelia opened her mouth. She closed it. "Yes," she said eventually because it seemed kinder than the truth. "Do you want some water?" "We don't have juice." Amelia stepped inside. The apartment was very small and very clean. There were 2 chairs at the kitchen table, and one of them had a phone book on it for height. There was a wedding photo above the stove. There was a yellow square of paper on the side of the refrigerator with handwriting. Amelia could not quite read from where she stood, and a child's drawing of a man and a girl under an umbrella labeled Dad taped beside it. There was an empty plate shaped like a sun on the drying rack, the crumbs already swept into a small, careful pile beside the sink. Amelia sat on the second chair, the one without the phone book, and held the glass of water in both hands. She had never been inside an apartment this small. She had also never been inside a home this carefully kept. The 2 facts arrived together in her chest, and she did not have a word for the feeling that came with them, only the understanding that the envelope in her backpack had become sometime in the last 90 seconds an insult. "My dad," Lily said, swinging her feet, "is at work. He fixes air. He says people pay him to make their houses breathe." "That's a nice way to say it," Amelia said. "He says nice ways to say things on purpose, so I'm not scared." Amelia drank her water. She left the envelope where it was in her bag, and she walked Lily back to the door, and she rode the bus home in the dark, feeling something heavy and clear settling under her ribs. She did not yet have a name for it. She would learn the name later. The name was Respect. Victoria found her in the kitchen at 6:20, still in her wet jacket, drinking a glass of milk, standing up. "Where were you?" "Out." "Amelia." "Mom." The fight that followed was the first real one of Amelia's life. It started in the kitchen and traveled the way fights do in big houses through 2 doorways and into the living room, and at some point it stopped being about a missed pickup and started being about every dinner Victoria had taken on a phone, every recital Victoria had watched on a screen, every time Victoria had solved a thing for her daughter by buying the solution rather than sitting beside the problem. "You fix everything with money because you don't know how to do it any other way," Amelia said. "And you do." "No, but I'm learning. And you stopped a long time ago." The sentence landed somewhere inside Victoria's chest. She had not let anything reach in years. She felt it land. She did not show it. She showed it later, an hour later, when Amelia had calmed down and was sitting on the floor of the study with her back against a bookshelf, and Victoria sat down on the rug beside her, which was something she had not done since Amelia was 7. "Do you remember," Victoria said, looking at her own hands, "that I told you my father was a mechanic?" "In Pittsburgh?" "Yes." She turned the watch on her wrist a 1/4 inch. "He worked for a man named McAllister, 11 years. He fixed engines that other men gave up on. He brought me to the shop on Saturdays when my mother was working, and I would sit on a stack of tires and read the books from the school library, and he would let me hand him the wrenches if I named them right. He taught me the names of every tool in that shop before I could spell my own last name." Amelia did not move. In the summer of 1991, a set of expensive imported tools went missing from the shop. McAllister told the police it was your grandfather. There was no proof. There was never any proof. There were just 2 men who said they had seen him near the storage room after hours, and a piece of paper my father had signed for a different inventory the week before, and that was enough. He was let go. The reason was put in writing in a way that followed him. She turned the watch again. "He never worked steadily again. 3 shops in our county. None of them would take him on. He took whatever he could find. We lost the house in the spring of 1993. He had a stroke in March of 1994. He was 51 years old. I was 16. Amelia's eyes were very full. This watch, Victoria said, was the only thing he had left when he died. My mother gave it to me at the funeral. She said your father wanted you to have something that still worked. She finally looked at her daughter. I built everything I have so I would never be powerless the way my parents were powerless. So I would never have to watch a man I love be erased because someone with more money decided it was convenient. And then last week, I walked into a convenience store and I saw a man put a carton of milk back on a shelf, and I saw the watch on his wrist, and for one full second, baby, I saw my father. Amelia leaned her head against her mother's shoulder. It was the first time in 2 years. The story Victoria had not yet told her daughter was the one her assistant had pulled out of public records and old human resources databases over the last several days. Ethan Cole, formerly senior technician at Northgate Mechanical Services, separated from the company 19 months ago. Reason listed suspected misappropriation of equipment. No charges filed. No restitution paid. Equipment never recovered. The supervisor who had filed the report, a man named Roy Talbot, had been promoted twice since. The pattern was not a coincidence. It was the same shape drawn over 30 years later on a different man's life. This was the moment the story stopped being one thing and quietly became three. It became the story of a man who was, without ever knowing it, repeating the fate of another man he had never met. It became the story of a woman who was, without yet admitting it, meeting her own oldest pain in the face of a stranger. And it became the story of a child who was at 12 learning the lesson her mother had needed 3 full decades to find. The thing that made it powerful was not coincidence. It was that all three of them had been walking toward this particular convenience store on this particular night for years. Old wounds do not heal so much as sleep. They sleep until a story comes along that resembles them closely enough to wake them. And once they wake, you do not get to send them back to sleep. You only get to choose what you do with them. You can bury them under your old habits, or you can use them to find the person who is standing exactly where you used to stand and offer them the hand no one offered you. Victoria sat with her daughter on the floor of the study a long time after Amelia had fallen asleep against her shoulder. She decided somewhere in that long sitting what she was going to do. She did not decide to give Ethan Cole money. She decided to give him a door. 3 days later, she met him on his lunch break at a diner he had picked on a stretch of road that smelled like rain and tire shops. She wore jeans and a sweater. She left the watch at home on purpose so the meeting would not feel weighted before it began. She introduced herself plainly, and she told him in clear, short sentences who she was and why she was there. She told him about a senior technician position at the facilities division of Hale Markets that paid more than twice what he was making with full benefits, with a sign-on amount that would handle his rent for the next 6 months. Ethan listened with both hands flat on the table. He did not interrupt. When she finished, he looked at her for a long moment with the careful, exhausted patience of a man who had been offered 3 or 4 miracles in his life and had learned to test the weight of each one before he picked it up. "Ma'am," he said, "I don't know who you are, but I'm not taking a job because you feel sorry for my kid. It isn't pity. I don't care what you call it. My daughter's gonna grow up with a father, not a man who took a paycheck out of someone's guilty conscience." Victoria took an envelope out of her bag and slid it across the table. Inside were photocopies of 3 pages from Northgate Mechanical Services internal disciplinary records, an email chain, and a sworn deposition from a former co-worker, all of which suggested that the inventory listed as misappropriated by Ethan Cole had in fact been signed out by Roy Talbot 2 days before the report was filed. "You didn't do it," Victoria said. "Somebody you worked for did. And he wrote your name on it because it was easier than writing his own." Ethan looked down at the pages. "Why do you have this?" "Because I asked." "Why did you ask?" She did not answer right away. She turned her coffee cup a quarter turn on the saucer the way she sometimes turned the watch. "Because I once knew a man this happened to," she said. "And he didn't have anyone." He did not say thank you. He did not say anything. He folded the pages once carefully and put them inside his jacket. He told her he would think about the job. He told her he was going to take the file to a lawyer first on his own time with his own hands because if he was going to fix his name, he was going to fix it himself. He stood up, left a $5 bill for a coffee that had cost $2.75 and walked out into the parking lot. Victoria sat in the booth for 10 more minutes after he was gone. She had not, she realized, expected to feel proud of him. She did. It was an unfamiliar shape inside her chest. It fit. The legal aid attorney Ethan found was a soft-spoken woman named Diane Marsh, who worked out of an office above a dry cleaner and drank a great deal of tea. She read the file twice. She told him, looking him straight in the eye, that she believed he had a real case. She also told him that real cases against employers in the state of Washington took on average between 8 and 12 months to resolve, and that during those months, Roy Talbot's lawyers would do everything they legally could to make Ethan's life harder. The flag would not come off his background check until a finding was issued. He would not be able to get a stable job in his field in the meantime. He thanked her. He drove home. He did not tell Lily anything except that something good might be coming slowly. That weekend, Lily's fever came back. It came back hot and fast and angry the way the second wave of an illness sometimes does, and by Sunday night her breathing had gone shallow and Ethan drove her to the emergency room at St. Vincent Children's Hospital with one hand on the wheel and one hand on her chest, counting her breaths. They admitted her. They moved her to the pediatric intensive care unit at 3:12 in the morning. The attending physician used the words pneumonia, and we are going to keep her, and the social worker used the words financial assistance application, and a young woman with a clipboard used the words, "You can fill these out later, sir," and Ethan signed everything they put in front of him without reading any of it. He sat in the hallway outside the unit with his back against the wall and his hands open on his knees. He understood with the clean calm of a man who has stopped having the energy to pretend that the bill for this stay was going to be somewhere between $15,000 and $30,000. He understood that he did not have it. He understood also that his daughter was alive and that this was the only line of the equation that mattered. He took off the watch on his left wrist. It was steel with a cracked leather band dial yellowed by years. Sarah had bought it for him second-hand on the day he passed his HVAC certification. With money she had saved from extra shifts, she had told him she had not worked. She had handed it to him with both hands, the way she handed everything she loved, and she had said, "Now, you look like a man who knows what time it is." He had not taken it off in 9 years. He turned it slowly between his fingers. He thought about the pawn shop on Rainier 2 blocks from the hospital, the one with the green sign that opened at 6 in the morning. He could be there in 20 minutes. He could be back before Lily woke up. A small hand holding a thermos came into his line of sight. Amelia stood there in a coat too big for her hair, wet from the rain. Behind her, in a long, dark coat that was already darkening at the shoulders, stood Victoria. Amelia held the thermos out. "It's chicken soup," she said as if she had practiced it. "I made it. It might not be very good. The video said to put rosemary, but we didn't have rosemary, so I used thyme. For Lily, when she wakes up." Ethan took it. His hand was not entirely steady. Victoria did not hand him an envelope. She did not hand him a check. She held out a small white card with 3 handwritten phone numbers on it. "These are 3 attorneys," she said. "The one at the top owes me a favor. The one in the middle is the best in the state at this kind of suit. The one at the bottom doesn't owe me anything, but she takes 1 pro bono case a year, and she said she'd take yours if you call her by Thursday." She stepped a little closer. "Whether you walk through any of these doors is up to you. I'm not paying for you. I'm not paying for her. I'm opening doors. The walking is yours." Ethan looked at the card. He looked at the thermos. He looked at the watch in his other hand and back at the card and finally at Victoria's face. He did not put the watch back on his wrist that night. He put it carefully in his pocket with the card like 2 things that would have to learn how to coexist. For the first time in 2 years, he had taken help and he had not felt smaller for taking it. Sometimes the deepest help we can offer another person is not to do the thing for them. It is to stand near them and say, "You are strong enough for this and I will be right here so that you do not have to be strong alone." Lily came home from the hospital 9 days later, thinner than she had gone in, but breathing the way a child is supposed to breathe. Margaret had cleaned the apartment while they were away. There was a fresh loaf of zucchini bread on the counter, and Senator was waiting on the doormat as if he had been assigned the job. Ethan carried his daughter inside in both arms, and Lily, who was not quite well enough to walk on her own, yet looked up at the yellow square of paper on the side of the refrigerator and said in a small voice, "Hi, Mom. We're back." He stood there with her in his arms for a long time, and he did not let her see his face. The next morning, he called the first number on the white card. He did not call the second one or the third one. He picked the first because Victoria had said the woman owed her a favor, and a favor that had already been earned felt cleaner to him than a favor that would have to be made. The attorney on the other end of the line had a calm, slightly tired voice and a way of asking questions that left no room for performance. Within an hour, she had agreed to take the case. Within a week, she had filed the paperwork. Within 10 days, she had the deposition transcript and 3 more pages of internal documentation than Diane Marsh had been able to pull on her own. What Ethan did next, he did without telling anyone. He drove to the small office park in Renton where Roy Talbot now worked as a regional operations manager. He waited in the parking lot until lunch. When Roy came out the side door with a sandwich bag and a phone in his hand, Ethan stepped out of his truck and called him by name. Roy stopped. Ethan saw his face do the thing faces do when they recognize a ghost. They stood in the parking lot 10 feet apart, and Ethan did not raise his voice. He had thought about this conversation for 19 months, and somewhere in the last few weeks he had decided what kind of man he wanted to be when he had it. "I'm not here to fight you," he said. "I'm not here to make you afraid of me. I have a lawyer who is doing all of that already. I'm here because there's a piece of paper she'd like you to sign, and I want you to know what it's for before you decide." He held it up. It was 1 page. It was an acknowledgement that the inventory listed as misappropriated by Ethan Cole on the date in question had in fact been signed out by Roy Talbot 2 days earlier and never returned. "I don't need an apology," Ethan said. "I'm not going to ask for one. I have a 6-year-old daughter, and she is going to grow up in a country where decent people get framed for things they didn't do. I can't fix that. But I can fix the part that's about her father. So sign it or don't sign it. Either way, I'm going home to her." Roy did not sign it in the parking lot. He signed it 3 days later in his lawyer's office after his lawyer had read it twice and explained that the alternative was a deposition under oath. He had been carrying the lie for 19 months, and his own conscience, it turned out, had been tired for most of them. When he handed the page back, he did not look at Ethan's face. He looked at the floor between them, and he said one quiet sentence that was not quite an apology, but was clearly the closest he was capable of, and Ethan accepted it because acceptance was cheaper to carry than resentment, and he had been carrying enough. 2 weeks after that, the flag came off his record. He did not call Victoria. He did not call Hale Markets. Instead, he applied for a position he had seen on a job board twice and clicked away from twice because it had felt like too much to hope for. The facilities team at St. Vincent Children's Hospital was looking for a senior HVAC technician. The same St. Vincent where Lily had been admitted. The same St. Vincent whose ductwork he had crawled over while she was in the pediatric intensive care unit, and where he had memorized without meaning to the way the air handlers hummed on the 4th floor. He interviewed on a Tuesday. The flag was gone. The interviewer asked him why he wanted the job, and Ethan told the truth that his daughter had been in their PICU, that he had spent 4 nights listening to their air handlers, and that he could think of no work in his trade that mattered to him more than keeping the air clean for kids who could not afford to breathe bad air. The interviewer wrote something on her notepad and did not show him what she wrote. He got the offer letter on Friday. He took the job. He did not take the one at Hale Markets. He told Victoria over coffee. She listened to the whole explanation, and then she did something she had not done in front of another adult in years. She laughed briefly, and the laugh was clean and surprised. She told him she had been hoping he would say no. She told him a man who took the easier offer when the harder one was the right one was a man who would have made her feel less proud of him. She did not tell him about the second thing she had been doing quietly in the background. She did not tell him for almost a year. The hospital bill from Lily's stay arrived in a thick white envelope 10 days after she was discharged. The total at the bottom was $19,462. Ethan opened it at the kitchen table with his hands flat on either side of the page, the way a man opens a letter he is about to argue with for the rest of his life. The amount due in the box at the bottom was 0. There was a single line in small print near the bottom of the second page. Account adjusted by external benefit assistance. Hale Family Foundation. He had heard the name only in passing in connection with Hale markets, and he understood in the kind of way men in his situation understand, without being told that someone who had decided not to put her own name on the gift had paid it through a foundation that bore the name of her family, the way she had once said she would only open doors. The way she had decided was not to wave the flag. He folded the page in half, and then in half again, and he did not say anything to anyone about it because some kindnesses are heavier when they are seen than when they are quietly received. That spring, Lily and Amelia became something neither of them had expected. Amelia came over on Saturday afternoons. She read aloud from the books she had finished, sometimes in voices, and Lily corrected her pronunciation of words she could not possibly have known how to pronounce, and the two of them built a city out of cardboard on the living room floor that took up so much space. Ethan ate his dinner standing in the kitchen for 3 weekends in a row and did not complain. Amelia learned slowly what a real friendship felt like when it was not based on whose mother knew whose mother. Lily learned slowly what it felt like to have a sister she had been promised in some other life and was finally getting in this one. Victoria and Amelia began having dinner together every Wednesday, just the two of them with no phones on the table. They took turns picking the place. Amelia picked diners. Victoria, who had not eaten in a diner in 20 years, learned the names of 3 waitresses in the same month. One Wednesday in May, when Victoria's car was at the shop and the driver was off, Amelia took her mother on a city bus for the first time in Victoria's life. They sat near the back. The bus was warm and crowded and smelled faintly of someone's perfume and someone else's coffee, and a man across the aisle was reading a paperback novel with the spine cracked in 3 places, and Victoria looked out the window at the city she thought she had already seen, and she cried very quietly into her sleeve. Amelia did not say anything. She held her mother's hand on the seat between them and let her have it. 6 months after the night at the convenience store on another rainy Tuesday in the same neighborhood, Ethan walked Lily into the same convenience store on 8th and Ridgeway. The boy at the register was a different boy now, but the bell above the door rang the same. Lily was wearing the wool scarf which had finally started to fit her at the neck. She was carrying a small list she had written herself in the careful kindergarten letters of a child who was only just learning to spell, and she was holding her father's hand the way she always had. Ethan put a full cart on the belt: milk, bread, eggs, 2 boxes of pasta, a jar of sauce, apples, a small bouquet of yellow tulips because Lily had asked, and a box of children's vitamins because the pediatrician had recommended them. Nothing extravagant. The grocery list of a household that had finally stopped counting in coins. Behind him in line stood a young woman in a thin jacket. She could not have been older than 23. She was holding a baby on one hip and a small can of formula in the other hand, and she was counting bills out of a wallet too thin to hold what she needed. Her cheeks were pink, in the way cheeks turn pink when a person has decided not to cry in public and is using all of her concentration to keep that promise. Ethan saw her look at the can in her hand. He saw her start to set it gently on the small ledge by the register, the way he had once set a carton of milk back on a shelf. He did not say anything large. He slid his card to the cashier and tilted his head just slightly toward the young woman's items. "Ring hers in with mine, please." The young woman started to refuse. She had the words ready. Her mouth opened around the shape of, "Oh no, please, you don't have to." He had heard those words before. He had said them himself once to a stranger who had offered to cover his coffee at a gas station 3 weeks after Sarah's funeral, and he had walked out without the coffee because he had not yet learned how to receive. He did not let her finish. "It isn't charity," he said gently. "It's a relay. One day it's going to be your turn." She looked at him for a long second. The baby on her hip pulled at the collar of her jacket. The cashier waited. Outside, the rain came down in long, indecisive lines on the glass. She nodded once, very small, and she did not say thank you out loud because some thanks are too big to be said in a checkout line, and they both seemed to know it. Across the aisle near the freezer case, two people stood very still. Victoria had stopped on her way home from a board meeting because Amelia had wanted hot chocolate from a specific brand they only sold in this kind of store. Amelia, holding the carton in both hands, was already looking up at her mother. Victoria did not say anything. She rested her thumb without thinking on the face of her father's old watch, and she felt somewhere very far inside her chest the man named Daniel Hale, who had not had anyone finally being given something over 30 years late. That night, on the side of Ethan's refrigerator beside the yellow square of paper that said, "Don't lose yourself while you're trying to survive," there was a second square of paper now. It had been there for a few months. It was written in the careful pencil letters of a 6-year-old who was just learning her capitals. It said, "Dad is the best person in the world." Ethan stood in the kitchen and looked at both pieces of paper for a long time. He did not see Sarah the way he used to, as a person he had lost. He saw her for the first time as a person who had stayed inside every choice he had made to keep being decent. Her note had not been advice. It had been a promise he had been keeping for 2 years without realizing it. He turned off the kitchen light and went to check on his daughter. She was asleep with the teddy bear under one arm and the scarf folded carefully on the chair beside her bed. He pulled the blanket up to her shoulders. In your own life, there will be nights you stand inside a store quietly returning a thing you cannot afford, working very hard to keep your face from showing your child the truth. There will be other nights you walk past a stranger and realize you have forgotten how to be kind in any way that does not involve a checkbook. And there will be nights perhaps when you are still small, still learning, and only old enough to sense that something in the room is wrong, but not yet old enough to fix it. None of us stays in one role for long. The person being helped today is the person helping tomorrow. The person who is cold today is the person who will keep someone warm next winter. Kindness was never a gift you give once and finish with. It is a flame you pass from hand to hand so that on the night your own hands are cold, somebody else somewhere is still keeping it lit for you. That night in a convenience store somewhere in Seattle, a carton of formula was paid for by a stranger. Nobody took a picture. Nobody put it online. A young mother went home with her baby, and a man 20 years older smiled gently at the rain on his way back to his truck. And somewhere, perhaps an older man named Daniel was finally smiling too, because kindness, once it has been passed from one hand to another, never really dies.